All right, guys, we're going to get going. Welcome to the Creating Your Whitetail Paradise seminar. My name is Jake Hendrickson. I run the Whitetail Evolution YouTube channel. For those of you guys that haven't seen it, it's a YouTube channel where we try to showcase a lot of the habitat improvements and hunting strategies that we implement on our properties. We go into a lot of detail in these videos, kind of the why behind the improvement, how we're doing it, where we're putting it in. And each one of these videos is anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes long. And again, we go into a lot of detail. We're going to go through a lot of information in this presentation. Some of the stuff we could probably go talk about for 30 to 60 minutes per slide. We're going to try to cut that down to 2 minutes just so we can get through everything. So this is going to be more like your general outline on how we really like to set up our properties, okay? And I want to start off by saying that if we can do it, so can you. And the reason I say that is because there is nothing unique about the properties that we hunt. There's nothing special about them. We hunt here in Michigan, just like each one of you guys do, and with that comes the same challenges that comes with hunting here in Michigan. Michigan has some of the highest hunter numbers in the country, and the areas that we hunt in are no different. We have a lot of hunters that surround our properties that do not share the same management goals that we do. They have more of that traditional mindset. They're more of those brown down hunters. So it's definitely a challenge when you have those brown down hunters surrounding your property. And we don't really hunt what I would call larger parcels, especially when you think about how far a deer moves throughout the hunting season, especially bucks. They move quite a bit during the hunting season. We hunt 2 70-acre parcels and a 36-acre parcel. So definitely not large parcels. I have also been assisting landowners here in Michigan the past few years, developing habitat plans for them to help improve the quality of the habitat for whitetails and also improve their hunting opportunities. Before you guys start putting your habitat plan together, the very first thing that you guys want to do is start setting some goals for your property. And you want to make sure that you're setting goals for the habitat improvements, like the timeline, like how quickly you want to put these things in. But you also want to make sure that you're setting harvest goals as well. Like, what are you guys going to be trying to target on this property? And every property is going to have different goals. So the goals for my property are not going to be the same for your property. That's totally okay. You just want to make sure that everyone that's hunting on that property has the same goal. So you want to make sure you have everyone that's going to be hunting the property, get everyone together to kind of come up with a common goal. The last thing you want to do is have 4 people hunting a property and 2 people want to take the property to the next level, let those younger bucks walk, target those older bucks, and then 2 other people say, this isn't for me, this stuff doesn't work. We're going to keep doing it the old-fashioned way. Your success is going to show or not show if you don't have everyone on the same page. Some things to consider when you're setting your goals is you want to make sure for sure that you have realistic goals based on a few things. A couple things here. How big is your parcel? Do you have a 5-acre parcel, or are you working with 200 acres? How many hunters do you have on your property? Is it just you hunting your property, or do you have 6 guys hunting your property? What's your willingness to work? Once you come up with your habitat plan, are you going to be up there every other weekend working on your improvements, or are you going to be putting your habitat plan together, then just showing up opening day of bow season, hoping for the best? You want to kind of tailor your goals to a few of these factors. Another piece of advice, guys, don't look to social media. There are some great bucks here in Michigan, but a lot of the pictures you're seeing on social media, they're taken out in Iowa, Kansas, on some of these large ranches. So you don't want to be applying those standards to the 20-acre parcel here in West Michigan. All right, so try to get to know your area. You can definitely raise the ceiling on the age structure by putting these principles in place in these themes, but you don't want to be applying what you see on social media to your property. Some of you guys maybe you guys have never heard of habitat improvements or putting a habitat plan together, and you're thinking, why should I waste the time to do this on my property? And so why should you consider habitat improvements? And there are plenty of reasons on why you guys want to be doing this on your property. I kind of narrowed it down to 3 right here. The first one is you're going to have a healthier deer herd. And when you're putting in these habitat improvements on your property, you're giving the deer everything that they want on your property. You're going to be reducing the stress levels of the deer on your property, and you're also going to have a healthier herd. Okay, healthier herd means you're going to have healthier does, which are going to have healthier fawns, higher fawn survival rate. Healthier herd also means healthier bucks. Healthier bucks are going to be able to express more of their genetic potential when it comes to antler development, so bigger bucks. Putting habitat improvements on your property is also going to increase the age structure of the deer in your area. When you're putting those habitat improvements on your property and giving the deer everything that they want on your property, they're going to be spending more time on your property. And the more time they're spending on your property, the less time they're going to be spending on your neighbor's property. So you'll get to control more of the neighborhood deer herd. Also, when you're putting habitat improvements on your property and you're placing them in specific locations, you're also going to be creating more hunting opportunities. So you're going to be putting certain habitat improvements in place for morning hunting, certain habitat improvements for afternoon hunting. You're going to be creating more hunting opportunities for yourself and whoever's hunting your property. So what does a deer need to view your property as paradise? Deer need a few things. They need food, cover, water, and they also need a feeling of security. And cover and feeling of security are closely related, but we're going to separate those two for this presentation. For the most part, feeling of security means that they need to feel safe. If a deer does not feel safe on your property, it is not going to call that area paradise. So for the most part, we want to treat our entire property as a deer sanctuary. We do not want to go in there. We want them to feel as safe as possible on our property. So where do I begin when I start laying out a habitat plan? The first thing that I like to do is analyze the local habitat, the area surrounding my property. And this is my property here down in Barry County that my wife and I bought in late 2018. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to look at what the area offers for the deer herd and what the area does not offer. The easiest way to do this is just go to any mapping software, Google Maps or whatever one you want to use on your phone, find your property, zoom out to the square mile or square 2 miles surrounding your property, and look to see, what does this area provide for the deer. And you're looking for the most part, food and cover. It's sometimes harder to see the water sources and hunting pressure. Just assume here in Michigan, there's going to be hunting pressure. So there's a couple different scenarios that you're going to see. The first one would be heavy ag, and that's what we have here. You can see there's a lot of crop fields in production and not a whole lot of cover. All right, and then you have heavy cover as well. That would be the complete opposite. So you'd have an example where there's a lot of cover, but not a whole lot of crop fields, not a whole lot of food in the area. And then there's going to be a whole lot of different scenarios of different percentages of mixed ag and cover. But what you're trying to do and why this is important is you're going to try to provide what the deer are lacking, what the resource that they're lacking on your property. You're going to try to give them what they don't have in the area. So now we're going to start actually creating our property layout. And the thought process behind the property layout is not very complicated. All we're trying to do is create a pattern on our property. And the pattern that we're trying to create takes place every single day in the woods. It takes place on public land, takes place on your property right now without habitat improvements, and it's going to take place on our property with habitat improvements. And that's the bed to feed pattern. But the cool thing about private land is we get to choose where this pattern is taking place. So we can choose where we're putting these improvements in to choose how we want the deer to move through the property. And if you remember from a few slides back, we want our property, the entire thing, to be a sanctuary. We want to eliminate pressure and create a sanctuary on our property. So in order to do that, we want the entire movement pattern on our property to stay within our property borders. We want interior movement. And before we kind of get into actually creating the property design and where we're going to be putting improvements, I do want to say there's more than one way to get this done. There's more than one way to bake a cake. If for some reason, this doesn't make sense to you and something else that you've heard from someone else makes sense, I would say apply what makes sense to you. What you don't want to do is start clearing out food plots, clearing out bedding areas when the plan and the why behind it doesn't make sense. So just try to, when you're doing this stuff, apply what makes sense to you. So the first thing that we want to do to reduce the chance that we're spooking deer and we're keeping our property as a sanctuary, we want to find out how we're going to get to and from our stand locations without bumping deer. So we want to make sure that we're able to access our property without spooking deer, and the best way to do that while keeping that movement pattern on the interior of our property intact is by having perimeter access. All right, we want to walk around the property whenever possible. When you can, you want to make sure you're kind of staying away from those food sources and those bedding areas. That's going to reduce the chances that you're going to be bumping deer on the way to and from your stand locations. And what this is going to do when you're not bumping deer on the way to and from your stands, that's going to keep the deer movement predictable on your property, again, because that movement pattern on the interior of your property is going to remain intact. This is going to allow you, the hunter, to hunt the same stand multiple times. I'm sure you guys have all hunted a stand location for the first time this season, and you saw a lot of deer movement, and you were really excited to get back to that stand location the next day. You go to the next day, nothing, right? Those deer most likely figured out that they were being hunted and their movement pattern changed. Either changed it completely, or they're just hanging out in those bedding areas a little bit longer, and they're coming out to those food sources a little bit later. By keeping the movement pattern on the interior of your property, accessing from the outside of the property, you have a greater chance of hunting the same stand multiple times by not spooking the deer. Don't take the easy way to your stand locations. A lot of the properties that we hunt, I'm sure that you guys have as well, have trails or logging roads right down the middle of the property. This would be the easiest way to get to your stands. All right, but when you're walking down the middle of your property, where we're going to have a lot of these improvements in place, you're going to increase the chances that you're going to be bumping deer on the way to and from your stand locations. That's going to add pressure to your property, and the deer aren't going to feel safe. If the deer don't feel safe, the movement's not going to be as predictable, and your hunting opportunities are going to decrease. So don't take the easy way, take the right way when you can around the perimeter. I'm going to go back to that slide just for a second because it will make more sense with this one. This picture right here, this is one of our access trails. If you guys can see this is my daughter standing on the access trail. Before the trail went in, everything looked like the forest floor to my right. Okay, a lot of stems, a lot of vegetation, but this is what we want our access trails to look like as we're going to and from our stand locations. So here's a map of the property, a little bit more zoomed in, and the white lines are the property borders and also our access to and from our stand locations. When you're creating your access trails, you want a clean trail. You want this trail to be as clean as possible. You want to remove all of the vegetation that's growing into your trail. You don't want to be touching anything on the way to or from your stand location. You're going to be leaving scent behind, and even if the deer don't smell you that day, that scent's going to still be there, and they're going to eventually figure out that they're being hunted, again, adding pressure to your property, less predictable deer movement. You also want to be removing all the sticks, all the logs off your access trail. When you're accessing in the afternoon, it'll be easier to step over those sticks. You can avoid them, but in the morning when it's dark, sometimes you'll step on that stick, it'll snap, and those deer are going to know that that is danger. You know, with those smaller animals in the woods, they don't make a lot of noise, they don't snap sticks like we do, so when they hear that stick snap, they know something's up. I like to rake the leaves and remove all the debris off my access trail like you saw in that previous picture. I like a really clean trail, bare trail. I don't want to make any noise. Now, later in October and November, the leaves will come down. I'm not going back out there to re-rake those trails and add pressure to my property, but if you can do it one time, you're going to remove a lot of that debris. It'll be a lot quieter when those leaves do come down in early November. A good example or comparison would be like a trail through a park. If you guys ever walk a state park trail through the woods, they have those nice clean trails. That's what we like our access trails to look like. There are going to be times where your access trail goes through an area that is more exposed to sunlight. You're going to have more grasses, a lot more vegetation on the ground. Again, we don't want to touch anything on the way to or from our stand locations. So in these places, I like to treat that with herbicide. So I'll go through with a backpack sprayer, fill it with Roundup, glyphosate, and then spray everything with Roundup. It'll kill everything, again, having a nice bare trail. There are going to be times, guys, where you are going to get closer to a food plot or closer to a bedding area where when you're accessing your property, you can kind of see into that deer movement. If this is the case, you want to incorporate screening. Screening is very similar to the privacy fence in your backyard, it serves the same purpose. You're trying to block the line of sight. You don't want those deer to see you, and you don't want to see the deer, okay? This is going to, again, hide your access around the property, which is going to reduce the chances of you spooking deer, reduce the stress levels on your property. Here in Michigan, this is a big one. You can also reduce the impact your neighbors have on your property. All right, so if you have a guy that's hunting on the property line, and he might be, shooting onto your property, or he's spooking deer a lot, you could reduce the impact he's having by screening him off. All right, so these are a few examples of some of the screens that we've had success with in the past. Norway spruce, that's the one we talked about before the presentation. This is going to be a taller screen, so if you need to block off something that's up on a hill and you need a tall screen, Norway spruce is a great option. Miscanthus grass is another great screening variety. It looks similar to what's pictured here. Once it's established, it's a really tall ornamental grass. It's a perennial, so you only have to plant it once. Switchgrass is another great option for screening. It's a lot of times used around the edges of a food plot to give it a nice soft edge. Those deer feel really safe within that food plot. If you're looking for a quick screen, an annual screen, maybe on a lease, sorghum is a nice screening variety. That's what we have pictured here. It gets anywhere from 10 to 14 foot tall, so another great screening option. All right, so now we're going to start actually choosing locations for the improvements on our property. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to choose locations for our food plots. Food plots are going to be the anchor of the deer movement on your property. This is how you're going to get the deer to move from one location to the other. You can pretty much pull deer anywhere on your property with food plots. When you're trying to find a location for a food plot, and for the most part, this presentation is geared towards smaller properties. With a larger property, you can have several movement patterns within the same property, but we're going to try to just create one movement pattern on this small property. And when we're trying to create one movement pattern, we really like to shade our food plots to one side of the property. And the thought process behind that is if you have food plots on one side of your property and also the other side, you're going to pull deer in two different directions. We would much rather have a consistent movement pattern throughout the property and have the food plots only on one side. Again, this is for smaller properties. Larger properties, you can have multiple movement patterns on the property. Some location considerations when you're trying to figure out where to place that food plot or what side of the property. For those of us in mixed ag areas or heavy ag areas, a lot of times we're going to have a crop field next to us that's going to act as a destination food source. That's where those deer are going to be hanging out for most of the evening and throughout the night. If we have this next to our property, we really like to shade our food plots to that destination food source side. And it goes along with the same thought process as we don't want to pull deer in two different directions. And if we put our food plots on the opposite side of the property, we're going to pull them in two different directions. We would much rather have a consistent movement pattern by placing our food plots on the destination food source side and give them a nice safe place to stage and browse before heading out to those destination food sources. Another thing that you want to consider before placing your food plots on your property in a certain location is, do you have neighboring hunting pressure? And I'm sure most of you have neighboring hunting pressure on your property. If you can, you want to try to place those food plots away from that neighboring hunting pressure. Again, that's going to pull those deer away from that neighbor. Okay, so he's going to have less of an impact. The last thing you want to do is, you have heavy pressure on one side, is put food plots on that side and pull the deer to that neighbor.
Hey Jay,
Yeah.
If all pressure was equal, would you put those food plots upwind of the bedding area? Or not,
Well, the wind,
always?
No, not always. The wind's going to change, so some properties are going to be a little bit more handicapped than others on where they can put them to. So yeah, that doesn't really go into the thought process as much. Okay. When you're actually trying to design your food plots, and you kind of have the area of your food plot or the side of the food plot or the property that you want to put your food plot on, instead of putting in one large food plot, try to break those up into several smaller food plots or food plot trails. That's going to do a couple things for you. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to reduce the stress of the deer or on the deer herd. Doe family groups are very territorial, And if you've ever sat over a food plot or a large field or a bait pile when it was legal, you've likely saw two doe family groups come together. They can show a lot of aggression towards one another. They'll fight with one another. They'll kick each other out, trying to get them away from their food source. So by providing several smaller food sources on the same side of the property, you're going to be able to separate those doe family groups and give them each a food source to themselves. This is going to allow you, again, to reduce the stress levels on your property, and you're also going to be able to hold more deer. It's also going to increase your hunting opportunities, because if you have multiple food sources on the same side of your property, you can hunt those with different wind directions, as opposed to if you have that just at one giant food source, sometimes you're limited on your hunting opportunities. So this is kind of how we laid the food plots out on our property down in Berry County. We kind of shaded them towards the top of the property, again, to pull them away from hunting pressure on the south. And we also want to kind of push them off into a destination food source kind of to the top right there. These are some of the basic food plot guidelines, guys, for increasing your food plot success. The first thing you want to do is get a soil test. You want to make sure that you're getting your pH where it needs to be. If your pH is too low or too high, the food plot, whenever you plant, it's not going to be able to absorb the required nutrients that are available in the soil. So most likely, most of the food plot varieties that we plant want to be neutral, right around 7. So definitely get a soil test and make sure that you're following the recommendations. Another reason that food plots don't reach their full potential is if they're not getting enough sunlight. And this is especially the case with these smaller food plots. It doesn't take much to shade them out. So just make sure that you're giving your food plots enough sunlight so they can reach their full potential. When you are planting your food plots, I have no issue with planting summer food plots, but when you're planting your food plots for the hunting season, make sure you're choosing a fall blend. All right, so if you choose a summer blend for your fall food plot planting, that's not going to offer enough attraction throughout the hunting season. A lot of that stuff is going to die back after the first frost. So just make sure you're choosing a fall food plot variety. I'm sure there's plenty of vendors down there that have great food plot options. Another thing that you want to do is instead of having monocultures in your food plots, like having maybe just clover in this plot, soybeans in this plot, brassicas in this plot, try to offer a lot of diversity within each food plot. Deer crave diversity, and if you're able to mix a lot of that stuff together, you're going to make your food plots that much more attractive. You also want to try to have similar blends in each of your food plots, and this is going to go back to the same reason why we created multiple food plots. It's going to reduce the stress levels on your property. It's going to reduce competition, because there's not going to be one food plot that's more attractive at any part in the season. They're all going to remain, the attractiveness on each food plot will remain consistent throughout the hunting season. So those doe family groups are going to have less competition throughout the hunting season. When you're designing your food plots, try your best to try to move those deer past your stand locations. Food plots are a great way to influence deer movement, and as you can kind of see, on this property, there's plenty of designs you can do to move deer past your stand, but on this property we have long linear food plots to kind of influence the deer movement from south to north and right past our stand locations. So when you can, try to influence the deer movement to move past your stand locations. You can do that with your food plot design.
How wide is that long skinny one?
Right here. So it's anywhere from, so this might be 8 feet right here, 6 feet right here. So that's another thing that you can do to kind of connect your food plot system together is food plot trails. With food plot trails, it's very important that you get enough sunlight. Even more so than those smaller food plots, they can really get shaded out. So if you're walking down your trail and you look up and you see branches coming in, it's time to cut some trees down. You want to make sure that those food plots get a lot of sunlight.
About how far does that food plot trail stretch from the south of
About 400 yards. So yeah, there's a lot of bedding opportunities back here, and the deer cut, and there's bedding opportunities right here, and so those deer kind of work the side of it, and our stand locations are on the outside, looking into that food plot trail. But yeah, a lot of sunlight. You also want to make sure with these food plot trails, because they're not very large, that you're planting browse-tolerant blends. So you don't want to plant soybeans, you don't want to plant brassicas, especially if you have average or high deer numbers in the area. They're going to wipe you out, and you're not going to be left with anything. So you want to make sure on these food plot trails that you're planting something that's more browse tolerant. We plant ours with a clover blend, and we overseed it in the fall with cereal rye. And these are a great way, guys, to lead deer around your property, whether that's from bedding to food or from food to more food. So now we kind of have our food plot system or food plot locations picked out. Now we want to shift our focus to the bedding opportunities on our property. A lot of the properties here in Michigan, and ours looked no different when we first got it. It looks more like open hardwoods, looks like a state park. When you walk around, these are not the conditions that deer prefer to bed in. They really like thick, high stem count, secure cover. Okay, so that's what we want to be providing for the deer on our property. And this is going to be the opposite end of the movement pattern. So we need to figure out kind of where we want to place these bedding opportunities. When we're trying to place it within our habitat plan, the first thing we want to do is create several opportunities for bedding near our food sources. This is most likely where those doe family groups are going to be hanging out. They have very hungry fawns that need to go back and forth to those food sources a lot. So they're going to be hanging out close to those bedding or close to those food sources. And you want to create several bedding opportunities next to the food sources for the same reason that we made several food sources, because you want to separate those doe families. It's going to reduce competition, and it's going to reduce the overall stress level. Another thing it's going to do is it's going to put the bucks to work on your property. Instead of having just one giant bedding area that the deer can kind of move through or circle down window to check for does, now he has to check each one of those bedding areas, and that's going to put him near more of your stand locations, and it's also going to waste more of his time. And the more time he spends on your property checking for does and messing around, the less time he's going to be on your neighbor's property. So once we kind of have some locations close to food plots that we want to create for these doe family groups, now we want to start creating additional bedding pockets throughout the property. And this is most likely where you're going to have those bucks hanging out during the hunting season. They really don't tolerate stress whatsoever, and they a lot of times want to have, or they for sure want to have, the most secure location to bed in. And those bedding areas near those food sources, there's a lot of stress associated with those areas. Those doe family groups, they're very territorial. Again, lots of stress, and predators frequent those food sources. It's not always the safest location. So those bucks, for the most part, they're going to want to be off by themselves somewhere throughout the rest of your property. So we like to create several bedding pockets throughout the rest of our property just to give that deer, depending on his personality, depending on the wind direction, that he has multiple options to choose from, so it increases the chances that he's going to be bedded on your property. As far as creating these bedding areas go, this is kind of the locations that we pick. They're on the interior of our property, away from our access. We have kind of several near the food sources, several pockets back here. The bucks really like to hang out back here. But as far as creating these bedding locations, there's a couple ways to do it. It just depends on the habitat that you have. Most of us have wood lots. That's the most common, I would say, that we need to create these bedding opportunities. So for timber bedding, the biggest thing that you need to do is TSI, timber stand improvement. What we're trying to do is we're trying to remove a majority of the canopy to let as much sunlight in as possible. The sun's going to do the rest. It's going to jumpstart that new growth. You're going to have a lot of early successional growth, and over the next couple of years, it's going to get really thick and provide those preferred bedding conditions. Depending on the size of the property, the size of these pockets is going to be a little bit different. The smaller the property, the smaller your pockets are going to be, because again, you want to separate these doe family groups. Larger properties, maybe a little larger in acre size, but you still want to make sure you're creating separate pockets to separate these doe family groups. When you're actually creating the bedding area, if you can, don't fight tree lean ever, but try to fell the trees away from the center. And this is going to do two things for you. The first thing it's going to do, when that tree falls, the top of that tree around the entire perimeter of that bedding area, that's going to create a screen. So anything in the middle of that bedding area is going to feel safe because it can't see out and you can't see in. Excuse me. The next thing that's going to do for you is for this next part here, you want to create an open pocket in the center. If you're falling trees to the center of that bedding area, it's going to be a lot harder for you to remove all those tops to create that open pocket. But if you fall the trees to the outside, you'll have to clear some space out, but it's going to be much easier for you. So you want to make sure you have an open pocket in the center of your bedding area. That way these deer can move around freely and they can choose a comfortable place to sit down.
Do you find that autumn olive is effective cover?
It is effective, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an invasive species, so I wouldn't go, I
Well,
wouldn't
it's
recommend
already
planting
all-
it, but if you have it on your property, I'd be lying to you if I said it was not effective cover.
Okay.
Did planting switch in one of those pockets, good cover for them?
Yeah, I've done that in a few of the bedding areas. I haven't noticed that it's, that they use it any more than one that's just woody browse that regenerates. But yeah, that's another thing that you can do. You want to add as much diversity to these pockets as you can. So a switch would be a great way to add diversity.
Did you throw Norway spruce, like you said you're gonna do?
Yeah, Norway spruce, white spruce is a good one for this, because Norway spruce again doesn't self-prune those lower limbs. So as the white spruce gets older, it'll kind of self-prune a little bit so they can get under it a little easier. But yeah, you want to add some conifers for diversity and thermal cover as well. So once you have that center pocket opened up in the middle of that bedding location, you want to make sure you're cutting several entrances and several exits into these bedding areas. The last thing a deer wants is to feel claustrophobic or feel trapped within the bedding area. It's not going to feel safe, and it's not going to use that bedding area. So make sure you're creating several entrances and exits to that location. They don't have to be really wide. You know, you're not trying to drive a truck through here, but if you can walk through that area, so maybe 3 foot wide, walk in and out comfortably, then you'll be fine for the entrances and exits. You just want to make sure that if a predator or you come in from one side, that deer can get out the back. If you want to really increase the chance that the deer are going to use that particular location, you can find a couple places within that bedding location and rake out a few beds. There was a picture earlier in the slideshow of a doe bedded down within one of the areas that we raked out. The deer really want a comfortable place to lay down, just like you or I would want to if we were to sit down in the woods. They don't want to sit on a bunch of sticks. So if you can just rake out a spot within that thick area, that you're going to increase the chance that they're going to use it. Again, just like we talked about, you want to try to, now that you've opened the area to sunlight, add some diversity to the area with maybe some switchgrass, maybe some conifers, and it's also going to provide thermal cover to the area. For those of you guys that have more open fields and you're trying to transition that into bedding habitat, switchgrass plantings are a great way to do that. Switchgrass is great bedding cover throughout most of the year. You can enhance that by planting shrubs, bushes, conifers, again, add more diversity, add thermal cover to those areas. So now we kind of have our food locations picked out, we have our bedding locations picked out throughout the property. Now we need to complete the pattern. Now we're trying to connect point A to point B, and we're going to do that by creating our own deer trails. For the most part, guys, deer are very lazy, and you can tell them exactly where to go. Some areas are going to be easier to tell them where to go than others. This example here, this is a rather thick area, a lot of stems. All we did here was we cut a trail right down the middle of it. We can tell the deer exactly where we want them to go. And so once we have our trail, we're going to try to encourage the use of this trail and also discourage the use of others. So if you can see, we have a couple of trees we dropped to one side, a couple of trees we dropped to the other. That's going to make it just inconvenient enough for those deer. If they veer off course, they're going to want to get back on course because there's a nice easy path. They can easily jump over that tree if they want to, but that's a lot of wasted energy in the winter when they're trying to conserve energy. They're going to take the easy path. So as long as you're creating these deer trails and telling them exactly where to go, you might as well bring them right by your stands. And so this picture here, the next slide is going to be what it looks like in the spring. And that's my son helping me make the deer trail. And so you can kind of see in this picture a little easier. We kind of drop the trees on one side and the other to kind of encourage the use of this trail. When possible, when I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to move these deer from one location of the property to the other, I really want to try to use an existing deer trail if it's available, if it fits as a part of the overall plan, if it makes sense with the plan. Because there's a reason that the deer are using that trail. It's going to be a lot easier to condition them to use that path if they're already using it. But if there's not a trail that works with the plan, that's okay. You can make your own and you can just blaze a trail right down the middle. This trail was not here before we made it. The trail needs to be thick on both sides in order to provide that security that deer crave. If you have an open hardwood setting and you're trying to get deer from point A to point B, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. You're going to have to take more trees down to get more sunlight in, and over time that area is going to thicken up, and then eventually you'll be able to have a nice trail with thick areas on both sides. If it's already thick, it's going to be a lot easier just to cut a trail right down the middle and tell them where to go. Again, we like to drop trees perpendicular to the trail. Again, that's going to influence the deer movement. It's going to make it just inconvenient enough to keep them on our trail. But we don't want to cut every single tree down all the way down the trail. That's definitely going to tell them where to go, but that's going to make them feel very claustrophobic. They're not going to feel very safe in that trail. They're going to feel trapped. So I'm not going to tell you that they're never going to use that trail, but they're not going to use it as much as if you give them plenty of escape routes. So if a deer's on this trail and something happens, it can still run any direction to get away from danger. So this is kind of how we have the deer trails laid out on our property. A lot of the movement is north to south. We do have some that are just going to, they're going to have times where the deer are going to move off your property. You want to leverage that again within your plan. But this is kind of how we have the deer moving throughout our property. And when you're placing your stand locations, it's very crucial that you're giving yourself multiple opportunities to hunt multiple wind directions and multiple times a day. So for the most part, we like to hunt in the afternoon, closer to our food sources, in the morning, back by the bedding locations. We try to keep our stand locations as close to the property border as possible. The smaller the property, the closer to the property border you need to be. On larger properties, you can kind of get in a little bit further. But we're trying to keep as much of that movement pattern in the center intact as possible. We want to keep that deer movement consistent throughout the entire hunting season. And if we're pushing in to the middle of our property, we're going to increase the chance that we're going to spook deer, and the deer are not going to feel safe on our property. It's no longer going to be a sanctuary. So again, stay as tight to the borders as possible because you want to keep your property sanctuary intact.
How often are you going in and clearing the deer trails?
I do that a couple times a year. So right now, it depends on what's blocking it. If we have like a big tree that comes down, like a lot of dead ash trees on our property, so if there's a big windstorm, a couple of those will come down each time, and they'll block a trail. And so I'll go through now and cut those up, clear the trail. And the last time I do it is probably Labor Day. And so I walk all these trails Labor Day weekend, make sure they're all clear. That way it's not obstructing any movement. Because the last thing you want to have happen is have a deer trail moving by your stand, and you have a tree fall down and it pushes the deer away. So you definitely want to make sure you're clearing those trails out. And the last time I do it is Labor Day. So really what we're trying to do, guys, with this whole thing is we're trying to condition the deer movement on our property. We're trying to tell them where to bed. We're trying to tell them where to feed. Again, create consistent movement on our property. And for the most part, as long as you're having that food source on one side and the bedding area on the other side, you're going to be conditioning the deer movement and creating a generational pattern that they're going to use for years to come. But there are definitely ways that you can strengthen your movement pattern. And some of the best ways to do that would be with mock scrapes, water holes, and with pinch points. I'm sure you guys are familiar with scrapes and mock scrapes, but what a lot of people don't know is that scrapes are not only used by bucks during the hunting season. Scrapes are used by the entire deer herd all year round. So I probably shouldn't have used a picture of a buck during the hunting season. I probably should have used a fawn picture in June. But this is one of the ways that deer communicate with one another. A good comparison to this would be for those of you guys that have dogs and you walk your dog and he always has to go to the bathroom and smell that same tree or that telephone pole or fire hydrant every time on the walk, right? He's communicating with the other dogs in the neighborhood. And that's the same way that the deer use scrapes. They're using that licking branch, they're depositing scent on that licking branch, depositing scent on the ground to communicate with the deer herd in the neighborhood. So you want to make sure that you're placing these communication hubs near your stand location, and this is a great way to kind of influence deer movement, to help strengthen the pattern and tell them which trail that you want them to use. Another great way to kind of strengthen the movement pattern on your property is with water holes for the exact same reason. These are attractions on your property, and you want to put those on the trails that you want to encourage the deer to use. Water holes are great for warm weather. Not this past hunting season, but I think it was the 2020 season. We had a very warm November. If you guys remember that, I remember hunting in a t-shirt, and our water holes got a lot of action during that kind of warm stretch. These are also great locations during the pre-rut and the rut. The bucks are running a lot, looking for does, chasing does, and they're going to be very thirsty, so water holes get a lot of attention. Another thing you can do on your property is leverage pinch points and funnels. You can also create these yourself. These are going to be areas that kind of consolidate deer movement. They pinch the deer movement down, creating higher hunting opportunities and great stand locations. A few that I have listed here that you want to try to leverage within your property plan. One is inside corners. If your property is located near an inside corner, you definitely want to kind of take advantage of that. An inside corner is if you have a big open ag field and you have ag field here, you have cover on all sides. If a deer is down here, it's not going to want to cross that open field and be exposed. It's going to work along that edge and cut that corner. So this would be the inside corner right here because there's going to be a lot of deer movement consolidating right there on the corner. Another one would be connecting cover. If you have a big woodlot on one side, a big woodlot on the other, open field in the middle, maybe you have a hedgerow that's connecting those two woodlots, the deer are going to relate to that hedgerow and they're going to use that to get from one side to the other. So if you have one of those properties where that hedgerow connects to, you want to try to leverage that within your habitat plan as well. Obstacles on your property, this could be anything from a couple trees you knocked down, a bunch of trees that blew over, maybe you have a pond. The deer are going to work around those obstacles. They don't really want to walk through that stuff. So they're going to work around the edges of that, and that's a great place to place your stand on the downwind side. If you want to try to create your own, a way you can kind of enhance those stand locations is by you have your stand location downwind of wherever that deer movement is pinched down, knock a bunch of trees down behind your stand location. That's going to, one, stop the deer from going downwind, and it's also going to push the deer in front of your stand location. Hunting your property, we could spend probably an hour just on this one thing, but these are kind of the general guidelines that you want to follow when hunting your property. You want to make sure that your property is a sanctuary the entire season. Okay, so you want to make sure that everything you're doing is to keep the sanctuary intact. And how we have this thing set up, again, is we have the interior movement pattern. We have our stands along the outside. So try your best, when possible, to hunt the edges of your property. Don't push too far into the middle. You're just going to educate the deer, and the deer movements can be less predictable. You want to make sure that you're playing the wind. You went through all this trouble to set everything up on the inside, keep that sanctuary intact, and you're hunting the edge. The last thing you want to do is blow your wind right into the middle of your property. Those deer are going to know, and the movement pattern will be compromised. Less is more, guys. You want to make sure that you're not hunting your property all the time. For the most part, we don't really hunt our property at all in the early season, unless we have a deer that we think we have pattern, then we'll go in. But for the most part, we don't hunt our property in the early season at all. You want to wait for the opportune moment. And what we have found, based on personal observation and trail camera photos, for the most part, those older deer that we're trying to target, they don't start moving consistently during daylight until about mid-October. So maybe October 17, October 20, definitely by the 22nd, they're moving more consistently during daylight. So that's the time of the year that we're really focusing on to start going into our property. But just because it's mid-October, that doesn't mean we're going to just jump right in and hunt our favorite stand. We also want to wait for the appropriate conditions to go in and hunt our property. And for the most part, deer move much more after a cold front. So you want to wait until that temperature drops, the barometric pressure is going to rise, you're going to have a lot more deer movement. That's a great time to move in and hunt your property, if it also is mid-October to late October. A couple other general guidelines. For the most part, we want to be hunting our bedding areas in the morning. Those deer are going to be off in those food sources, and you want to sneak into those bedding locations to kind of catch those deer as they're moving back to the bedding areas. Completely the opposite in the afternoon. You want to be hunting near or around those food sources because those deer are going to be in those bedding locations, and you want to catch them as they're moving to those food sources. Does this stuff work? I'll tell you, if you're willing to put a habitat plan together and put in the work to actually install the improvements on your property, it absolutely does work. So the property we've been kind of showing you guys throughout this presentation is our house down in Barry County, 36 acres. We've been working on the habitat for the past 3 years, and we were able to shoot this nice 10-point buck off the property this past season. So if you're willing to put in the work, put a plan together, then it absolutely does work. We went through a lot of information in not really a whole lot of time. Again, each one of these topics we could have probably covered for 30 minutes. If you guys have any questions, We do have a lot of information on our YouTube channel. We try to put out a video every time we're putting in an improvement on our property, also some hunting strategies throughout the hunting season. This is a great resource if you want to try to learn more about this stuff. If you have any questions on a particular topic, leave a comment or a question on one of the videos. I get to each and every one of them to let you, or to make sure that I respond. But yeah, if you guys do have any questions about your property and you want to kind of maybe go into more detail about your property, I'm going to be hanging out at the National Deer Association or the Quality Deer Management booth for the rest of the day. I'd be happy to talk to you guys about your properties and maybe get into more detail about what you want to do with your habitat plan. But yeah, so that's where I'm going to be hanging out for the rest of the day if you guys have any additional questions. But thank you for coming to the Creating Your Whitetail Paradise seminar. I appreciate you guys being here, and have fun at the Huntin Time Expo.